Hello folk, how you doing? Scotty. So as I had recently covered in a response on the Finnish Bolshevik, I had covered on the human nature argument, and I did of course address briefly on the humanitarian argument I've had before in the past. And that argument was to say that humanity is somehow more important than economics. Not only do people misinterpret capitalism, you've got a lot of people out there who do not understand the first thing about economics. Take for example people's view of money, of prices. It takes a great understanding of economics to understand why it strongly correlates with humanity. And if you oppose economics, you lead down the road of disastrous consequences. So let's get down to what Thought Slime has to say.
In most people's minds, anarchy summons up visions of a lawless hellscape where only the strongest and most brutal people can survive. Something like The Purge. In fact, the second Purge movie literally has the subtitle, Anarchy. But I don't want that. It's obvious that in a world where only the strong survive, I'd be burned for fuel on day one.
This is one of the most common arguments you're going to hear about capitalism in terms of individualism, etc. It's the dog-eat-dog world, it's all about self-interest, every man for himself, therefore it's only affordable for the rich and you don't care about the poor. Every man for himself means that, folk just won't care about anybody else, and therefore you need socialism to solve such a problem, because if you don't have collectivism, wherever would you be?
How could I want something so incongruous with my effete soft boy lifestyle? What I want is socialism, but without a state? Also, it'd be mad decentralized. We call this framework anarcho-communism.
Again, focus this thing, you want this and you want that. It's all these aspirations about wanting something, right? And you want socialism without the state. It's all well said and done. But when you look at the history of the Paris Commune, it ended in terror. The exact same thing happened in anarchist Catalonia. It never was anarchist. Pretty much like what you saw of the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone when a terror group formed in that of anarchist Catalonia. It was the same story in the Ukraine Free Territory. They really don't understand the difference between what you've got theoretically to what you put into practice. They don't understand practice. They just brush practice aside as if it just doesn't matter. They're telling you that socialism is what the theory tells you. Oh, but such and such said this. Oh, but Karl Marx said that. Oh, but Friedrich Engels said this. Oh, but Vladimir Lenin said that. Who cares what they said? Doesn't matter what they said. It's what happens when you put things into practice. It's all well speaking about your aspirations of a moneyless based economy, but how's that going to work in practice?
Real quick, here's the definition of socialism I use, so we can be on the same page. Common ownership of the means of production, which is to say that the stuff needed to make the stuff needed to survive, so factories, tools, and farms and that kind of thing, are owned and controlled by everyone that depends on them, rather than privately owned by whatever ding-dong had the money to buy them.
That's an oversimplification of the definition of socialism. Socialism is defined by state direction of the economy. Again, that's politically incorrect, and I know that you will only like that fact. Economic central planning, the political centralisation, collective ownership or control over the means of production. Nowhere does it confine things with the definition of socialism around, it has to be in the hands of the workers or it's not socialism. It doesn't say that anywhere. You can find in various dictionary definitions of socialism, umpteen dictionary definitions of socialism, and you will find that state ownership correlates. It just so happens to be that's the most common dictionary definition, and that's the one that you've seen in the real world. In practice, we've seen that definition of socialism. But when you put it into practice, who is it that's going to take away the private sector? Who is it that taxes the people? Who is it that ends up taking all control of such things? When you nationalise, who does it end up in the hands of? It ends up in the hands of government, doesn't it? It's all well speaking about, it does this and it does that. Eventually the government will wither away. Well, how do you know? If you get in there, have you got any plans of how government's just going to wither away? Even if that was the case, and let's just say the state just withered away, what are you going to do is stop individuals going and doing their own thing. So you're going to need an entity there to try and dictate to me what I can and cannot do. And it just so happens to be in practice, time and time again, Soviet Union, doesn't matter what it was, each and every single one of them led down the road of exactly what we saw, the totalitarianism.
Sounds pretty good, right? But if you ask centrists and right-wing goofballs about it, oh, it works on paper, but it'll never work in real life. There's just one little thought-terminating cliche that prevents socialism from ever working in the real world. Attila the Hun, Elizabeth Bathory, Mozart, Andy Dick, Marie Curie, Camus, Tilda Swinton, Napoleon, Octomom, Nelson Mandela, Sonic the Hedgehog. All human, all possessing the same mercurial essence, the unseen, irreducible, inalienable quality of human nature that makes their actions and behaviors exactly the same if you think about it. Socialism can't work because people are simultaneously too greedy and too lazy. That may seem like an oxymoron, but it isn't because... Well, anyway, that's a pretty dim view of humanity. If you ask me, I happen to think that mutual aid is a factor of evolution.
Folk, it's a contradiction of what he's trying to say. He was going on earlier on about the self-interest and the dog-eat-dog world, more or less. And now he's trying to say that humanity isn't greedy and, self-centred and that, they're only lazy in his perspective, right? It's not so much that humanity is lazy, right? Some people have got a higher work rate than other folk, but typically, it is socialism that destroys the work rate. And this was the issue in terms of the laziness. And what was discovered even by historians, he says that even the hardest working of people lost the will to live. They were dying of starvation, despite having, deer and turkey surrounding them, the large quantity of seafood, the fertile soil to grow their own food. They were dying of starvation. They weren't able to work for the fruits of their own labour. Yes, when it comes down to socialism, it destroys the incentive for people to work. And this idea about how socialists don't view folk as greedy, why the hell do they keep going on about capitalists then? Because capitalists themselves are human beings. See, it's a contradiction. They basically say that capitalists are greedy all the time.
The assumption Wieners make is that socialism is somehow based on everyone sharing stuff with no protections in place if somebody tries to take all this stuff, because it's all based on the honor system, I guess.
Folk, is a contradiction of what he basically says, because he's more or less just said there that you need an entity there in order to govern that, a protectionist entity to govern such an issue. That is the definition of government. Again, let's just move on what he's saying next.
All the stuff is just put in a big pile, and people can come and take whatever they want. So one person could take everything, and everyone else would be hosed. But socialism doesn't just mean everybody sharing things. It means that if everyone in a community needs something, nobody gets to own it privately. And as a consequence of that, people kind of have to share things.
I love that word. People have, the key word there, have to share things. They have to. That's coercion. That's a bit like somebody just walking into your house and helping themselves into your fridge. They just walk into your house, open your fridge and take what they want, and you have to share it, and you've no got an option. See, this is exactly what I mean about how evil socialism is. Socialism really is pure evil. You're basically saying your individual liberty does not matter. I, who don't even know you, I don't even understand who you are, I've never met you in my life, I'm going to force my will upon you, and you have to share because I say so. And the only way that you can do so, when you say you have to do this, the only way you can do that is forcing. Force is evil. You have to violently impose your will upon other folk in order to share.
Let's look at a very realistic example I've cooked up with my good anarchist brain. Say we have some rich pervert, let's call him Dave the Capitalist. Because of his inherent rational self-interest, he covets material wealth.
We've been through this many times before, and it even correlates before with the argument against that of Viki. It's this thing they don't really understand. The material wealth that these companies and capitalists have created, these folk continue to benefit from each and every single year. See if you took away the capitalists, see if they packed their bags and they left the country and there was no rich people left and they took all the capital with them and all those companies all closed down, what would your high street and your current city look like then? Most of the businesses would all be gone, therefore all the products would all be gone. And let's say online shopping, right? All your online companies like Amazon, etc. just all disappeared as well. And what you left with? What have you got then in terms of your material wealth? So you're taking away the material wealth of folk and you're making them poorer. You've called them greedy just because of the fact that they make money off you. But you're forgetting something. When you hand your money off, when you physically take your money and you hand it off, what you doing? You're buying a product, you're getting something in return. It's not just a case that it's a one-way street. How the hell do you think you're sitting at home with all your products? How do you think you've got your computer sitting there? And then you say that you get nothing in return and that the capitalist was just greedy? You know, and that's what drives me nuts, folk. That honestly, that's what drives me absolutely nuts.
In his village, the greatest producer of this wealth is a big fidget spinner factory. All the rest of the people in his village need those fidget spinners to soothe their nervous energy. Under capitalism, Dave gets to buy the factory, assuming he has the capital to do so. Then he owns the fidget spinners, and everybody has to pay him to get one. And since they have no other way to self-soothe, he can charge whatever he wants. That's called inelastic demand.
Again, folk, I've been through this argument many times before, and I even went into it with a response to Viki 1999's argument, because the fact of the matter is, they can't just charge whatever they want. How can they? The reality is, a company can only charge a price on something that the consumer is willing to pay for it. There is a certain threshold and then there is a drop-off point. You know, I've got a prime example here. Here's a wee thing that I got years ago. A fun wee thing with the fingers and everything, because I'm just the sort of person that just loves wee thingy. It just came to my mind there, right? And obviously, it's just something to fit her about with. And this is arguably a lot more fun than that stupid wee fidget spinner that you're obviously speaking about. A company would come along with something better, and they would charge far less than what that other company is, and that company would be losing customers. That's the economic reality of what happens when a company tries to ignore its consumers.
He can bilk the poor fidgety peasants for everything they have and live high off the hog on his fidget throne. Under socialism, Dave doesn't get to keep the factory if everyone else needs it. Sucks for Dave, right? How's he gonna feed his capitalist family? Oh wait, it's fine, because all of the things necessary for survival, like farms and shelter, are owned in common, so he has just as much right to food as anyone else, presuming that he shares in the labour of producing it.
That argument is remarkable, given the fact that the recorded history of communal ownership of agriculture was specifically what led millions to their deathbed as they died of starvation. You saw it in the Soviet Union in 1929 when they centralised agriculture. Again, all the excuses come out and they says that, oh well, it was all because of the fact that it was today with Stalin, or it was today with the weather conditions. A great leap forward in China, more than 40 million people died of starvation. And this is what I mean, because I mentioned it before, and I says there are consequences for your actions. You ignore economics in terms of human nature. You ignore economics and think you can just impose any policies that you like. Well, if that was the case, then what about the Juche idea policies? The Juche idea policies in North Korea between 1995 and 1998 was 100% the reason for why millions of people in North Korea died of starvation. I mean, you're basically saying to folk they shouldn't have the rights to owning the fruits of their own labour. And what you're basically saying to me, right, because again, I'm a photographer, you're saying to me that I'm not allowed to own my own private business, do my own thing, and that should be forced from me, and I'm not allowed to make my own way in life. Basically going to force me into a collective group. That's what you've basically says.
But how would the peasants take away the factory? They just walk in and take it, because the police and military wouldn't back up Dave's property claims, because property claims wouldn't exist, and ideally, neither would the police or military. Socialism doesn't break down if people refuse to share, because you can't hoard things from people if nobody respects or critically defends with force your right to privately own things if other people need them to survive. Human greed isn't a big problem for socialism because the economic system doesn't incentivize it or protect it. But it's a big problem for capitalism, though. Oops, 1% of the global population owns 50% of the total wealth on the planet.
The thing that really gets me, and forget this whole thing today with the 1% elite, in every instance of socialism, it has led to an economic catastrophe. There is not one single country in this entire planet Earth where socialism has ever worked. And you could use the excuses and say, oh well, that's state socialism and all the rest of this, but yeah, that's fantastic. It's all well said and done, but again, you can't place your theory above practice. Doesn't matter about your aspirations. It's what socialism turned into in practice when you put it into practice. That's why it ended in the state that it did.
A lot of the jobs people do now would be completely irrelevant in an ANCOM society. We wouldn't need anyone to work in advertising or finance. We wouldn't need managers, middle managers, presidents, vice presidents, executives, account managers, brand specialists, thought leaders, lobbyists, or any of the other parasites that capitalism makes essential nowadays.
Right, so basically they're parasites for having produced products that folk continue to buy for every single year, where they get products that they benefit for. So apparently they're parasites for having produced all those products. People continue to buy for them, benefit for them every single year, but they're parasites. You know what that parasite is? The parasite is where an entity, a thing, that lives off the fruits of the wealth of others. And if you want to know what that is, it's called socialism. That's what it is. What do you think the productive sector is? Productive sector's the private sector. The public sector's not the productive sector. The public sector lives off the wealth of the private sector. It's the private sector that finances the public sector. I thought it would be, reasonable to go on about the economic calculation problem at first, but you see, when you come across childish arguments like that, then it just becomes a serious problem.
A lot of jobs just straight up don't need to be done at all. David Graeber writes about what he calls bullshit jobs. Quote, in the year 1930, John Maynard Keynes predicted that by the century's end, technology would have advanced sufficiently that countries like Great Britain or the United States would have achieved a 15-hour work week. There's every reason to believe he was right. In technological terms, we are quite capable of this, and yet it didn't happen. Instead, technology has been marshaled, if anything, to figure out ways to make us all work more. In order to achieve this, jobs have had to be created that are effectively pointless. Huge swaths of people in Europe and North America in particular spend their entire working lives performing tasks they secretly believe do not really need to be performed. I'm a photographer, it doesn't need to be done. It's more of a luxury. I would love to actually see you actually list out what those jobs are. You even go down the road to this whole thing today with automation. You require people having jobs, and the reason why you can't completely eliminate human beings having jobs, those same human beings need money in their pockets, and they need money in their pockets in order to drive production. Robots can't read people's minds. It's the same problem, it's the economic calculation problem. You're faced with that problem and that's it. There's a whole lot of human energy that could be redirected to more useful purposes. And this is exactly what destroys your socialism, the economic calculation problem. You destroy the information of profits and losses. No question about it. And I had this argument just recently. The person seems to think that you can have nationalisation with this economic central planning, and somehow you can have consumers driving production at the same time. That's an oxymoron, folk. The consumer is no longer driving production, where prices are able to fluctuate in the market, which is important, that's what you require. So since prices are no longer fluctuating, and I'm going down the road of your theoretical nonsense where you'd probably want a moneyless based economy, what that essentially means is you've no longer got the information of profits and losses. No price signals. What ends up happening as a result of that? You end up doing jobs and producing things, overusing scarce resources, doing things that people don't want, and putting it into parts of the market that are unnecessary.
neglecting those with greater needs. Because how else are you going to provide for 65 million people? You've got an economy with trillions of different products. How are you going to plan production for all of that? Forget it even existed and take our living standards back 200 years or something? Wow, I mean, I thought, the Finnish Bolshevik was bad, but...
And that's not even touching people who want to work and be productive but can't find a job, or the idle rich who literally do nothing.
You're sitting there with so many products probably sitting in your own house, and you benefit for these companies, which they are nae idle, by the way. You just don't see behind closed doors and the hard work that they go through in order to keep a business alive and keep people in their jobs. Your argument about that of the unemployment, etc. Well, that was your own fault. You wanted your higher tax rates, you wanted your public sector, you wanted your welfare statism, you wanted all your socialist social security. You then crippled people through the minimum wage law. You drove inflation through the roof, even through that of the fractional reserve banking, through the printing of the fiat currency.
But granted, there are a lot of jobs that are difficult and require specialized training. Here's the thing though, I really don't want those jobs being done by people who are just cashing a check. I want my doctor to genuinely care about my health and be passionate about learning and practicing medicine.
And here comes this argument again, the for-profit system. Therefore, because it's for profits, then it means it's inefficient or something, and you wouldn't want people dealing with your health if it's for profits and all this crap. I was born into a country that's got the NHS, your universal healthcare system, and it's a load of shit. It's never worked a single year in its entire history. And you can basically see, this is 1958, look, 1958, and a long waiting list, right? You're hearing these same excuses today, same excuses. When you do away with the profits and losses, you're never going to have something that's efficient.
There are probably a lot of very caring, intelligent, and fastidious people who can't become doctors under capitalism because they can't afford the training.
Again, folk, I've been through all that, and I've already explained the reason why the costs get so far out of control and why they can't afford to become doctors. That was actually the fault of socialism.
Just imagine the way specialized fields could be revolutionized if everyone with the necessary drive and talent was able to participate in those fields, and those without those qualities didn't feel compelled to participate in them and junk everything up just to get a paycheck.
The argument you're basically saying here is the fact that the profit motive means nothing, and that profits do not create the incentive for people to work hard. If the profit motive meant nothing, why else if you get people, demanding higher paid wages? It's not because they were indoctrinated today. So that's the reason why economists agree, when it comes to the bell curve, they agree that nobody would ever accept 100% tax rate, right? Nobody would accept 100% income tax.
Every doctor that's ever pushed pills on you because they had a sweetheart deal with the manufacturer, every therapist who's ever stalled to bill more hours, every lawyer who defends Exxon Valdez when they have an oil spill, every cab driver who took the long way to your destination, every salesperson who tried to push a useless extended warranty, they all did it because the point of their job is to make money, not to help people, not to service human need.
The point that you miss out is the fact that the only way that the capitalist can actually make a profit in the first place is by providing a service that benefits the consumer. So they have to actually benefit the consumer in the first place in order to gain a profit, in order to be a success as a business.
Ultimately, I can't prove what human nature is. I can't prove people are fundamentally good or hardworking, but even if we weren't, I think it's worth challenging the assumption that the way people behave now is intractable and unchangeable. I don't believe there's such thing as human nature. We're flexible animals. Human beings are really, really good at adapting to new ways of doing things. We need to get better at the reverse, adapting the way we do things to be better for human beings. We're good enough to live in a better world. We need to fix the mess that capitalism has made of our lives. We can fix it, and we will fix it, because humans have the capacity to be compassionate and hardworking.
Well, I can tell you this, Thought Slime. Sticking a gun to folks' heads is not compassionate. Trying to force people into a collective group and subordinating their individual rights and liberty is nothing at all to do with liberty at all. So you don't support liberty one bit. You're taking all that away from them through the use of force, and that's what you call compassionate. Your socialism is dictatorial. You want to control and dictate everybody's life and say to them, you can't do this and you can't do that. What right do you have to dictate to an individual what they do with their own life? How can you say you have to do this and you have to do that? You're going to have to control the issue. What's the antithesis of liberty? Control. Control's the antithesis of liberty. That's no liberal. There's nothing liberal about trying to control people. So let's, of course, move on, and we'll take a look at a number of comments that I've got from my previous argument in my previous video. Conduct 1 goes on to say, overall, I think your video was very well done, but I would have added a few more points. For example, at the beginning of Viki's video, where she compares the idea of investing in R&D, lowering the price of the product or marketing. With her point on lowering the price, a point you could have made is that after a certain point, when you lower the price, you will have too much demand and not enough supply. With her point on marketing, you could have made a legal argument on how if you do that, you are susceptible to getting sued for things like false advertising, which destroys the image of your company and its reputation. With her point on how the people like Steve Jobs only stole old tech and how the Wright brothers were not invested in, brings up a few questions. Firstly, Steve Jobs could be attributed with combining those technologies into a new product that there was high demand for, or how would those technologies become widespread without the profit motive? His point in the Wright brothers I did not understand. The Wrights were entrepreneurs and owned their own bicycle company and previously their own printing company, and how would the airplane became as widespread and as affordable means of travel as it is today without private companies competing over the new form of transport. Overall, the response was good, and if somehow you did mention these as points, that's fine, as there is the off chance I missed something. Well, thank you very much for your comment, and of course I do think it's very insightful, and you do state a few really valid points on your argument, especially with lowering the price to a certain degree, and demand would outstrip that of the supply, and of course that would create us an issue. It was the very fact that, and like I had pointed out, you cannot reduce your prices below your production. Very few can get away with that. I think Amazon runs at a loss to a certain degree and can get away with that and puts it into the research department, but very few can get away with doing that, running at a loss. The fact of the matter is, you're forced into a position where you would be forced to have your prices above that of how much it costs you in producing, etc. And that was the kind of the point that Viki missed out. The other thing, like you had mentioned rightly about that of the reputation, you are right for pointing that out, and that's something I should have stated myself. I don't know about things today. I could imagine it really would damage their reputation. I'm pretty sure there would be examples out there today to prove for that. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they could face heavy punishment for the sake of, false advertising. And there probably is, examples out there to show for that, and damaging reputation. You're absolutely right. As Pee-wee goes on to mention the quote by Margaret Thatcher, the problem with socialism is you'll eventually run out of other people's money. It summarises socialism perfectly. It addresses that socialism infringes on other people's private property, and it addresses that socialism ignores scarcity. Well, it's just like I said earlier on, at the end of the day, they don't understand the trade-offs and everything. They think they can just impose policies and do whatever they like, ignore economic reality and ignore economics itself. They think they can just argue with that, and they don't realise the consequences that follow that with regards to socialism. I mean, you're absolutely right in the point that you make, which is valid to say the least, especially on what Margaret Thatcher stated. And it was like I said, if you've not got a private sector, I didn't go into it too much depth. If you've not got a private sector, your only option then is the printing press, and that's it's an inevitable consequence. I says to folk, you're going to drive the country into hyperinflation, But the way that Thought Slime's going on about, Thought Slime just there, he's obviously going on about this idea of the moneyless based economy, and it's so delusional. And even then you're faced with the economic calculation problem. It's unavoidable, and that's what they don't understand. Socialism is faced with so many problems, more than just, of course, the human nature. It's faced with so much economic problems, and it's actually the economic problems that are the reason why it cannot avoid totalitarianism. Entertainment Garrett goes on to say, marketing is not inherently bad. Marketing is the science of how to spread the message. When Viki 1999 publishes a video, she is marketing the word of Marxism. Deceptive advertisements are filtered out by the market. There's a very interesting video by Solar Sands about this, and short corporations chose for their ads to be less deceptive because they cared about the consumer and consumer trust. Marketing is actually good, as it is a way of rewarding the most talented artists in society. Again, it's a very valid point about the marketing issue. You're right in what you say at the end of the day, and it's like I said, if they wish to uphold their reputation, of course, provide for that of consumers, then they would have to, provide for what the consumers want. And it's the consumers' information themselves that's going to, dictate and tell businesses what they want. And if they don't get it, they'll go elsewhere and get it. And I even stated that about the free market. But yeah, it's one of these things that marketing is looked at and misunderstood, and you're actually seeing the likes of Viki 1999, they are actually marketing their own, ideas, especially on YouTube. And Sea Owl Drift mentions, capitalism is not flawless, never was, never has been a flawless ideology, both politics and economics. However, capitalism is shown to be more effective, positive way than socialism ever has. Well, that's exactly right, socialism has never worked. It's an ideology that destroys the incentives for people to work hard. It's never worked economically. Like I says, it cannot avoid totalitarianism. And one point that I should add that destroys the argument by Thought Slime, and that is the very fact that if you're going to have to get rid of the private sector, and in practice, you're going to need a specific character that takes you there. You're not going to get a Bernie Sanders to do it. You're not going to get a Jeremy Corbyn to do it. Not some half-hearted person. You're going to require a dictator. Someone who's going to expropriate private individual ownership through the use of force that would take you that far. And it just so happens to be the very type of character like your Nicolas Maduro, which is the very reason it leads down the road to totalitarianism, and the government doesn't just wither away like they imagine it to be. Anyway folk, thank you for watching my video. If you get anything you would like to add, comment in the comment section below and I'll be sure to get back to you. Be sure to like the video, share the video, and of course, thank you for watching. I shall talk to you later. Cheers.